Last week, we introduced you to Chris and Amanda Young, who shared their story about their daughter Evie and how she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes after slipping into a diabetic ketoacidosis or DKA. Looking back on it, they realized that symptoms that could easily be mistaken for growth spurts were actually telltale signs.
The first days home after her diagnosis, and she went from being in a coma to waking up to having her life change completely.
Yeah,
to
waking up, exactly.
to
Waking up to this.
waking up to it, and then anytime she wanted to eat, we had to go wait. We have to count that before
And
we
we're
can.
panicking because we don't understand it. I mean, like now we understand it, but then it didn't seem like anybody in our lives understood it.
With type 1, the formula of how Evie eats is completely different because they are basically becoming her pancreas. Amanda said after Evie was released from the hospital, she made the mistake of clearing the house of all sugar.
We've come to find out is that actually with type 1, she needs sugar. It's funny to even think that a juice box saves my kid's life, but it does.
Well, you have to be aware of what she's taking in.
And then knowing the importance of certain foods and that sugar is actually something that could save their life as well. And knowing that
Just balance. It's
just
all
balance. It's all balance, and having to figure that out.
And speaking of figuring it out, Amanda took the initiative to stay with Evie the first year after she was diagnosed and help situate Evie and prepare the school.
Just to see how the dynamic was day to day, and paid attention to how she would check herself, lunchtime and her play and how that dynamic worked. So I actually sat in the back room of her class and I generated a flow chart for the teachers and the nurses and the after school people and anyone who would be assisting her. That way they could work with her, but yet not have it take away from their experience of teaching the class or managing the, whatever.
Doing all the work they already have to do.
All on top of
having
taking care of her.
It's a process that Evie, now 8, has taken all in stride. Since her diagnosis at age 6, Evie has been able to inject herself with an insulin pen, which can range from 6 to 8 times a day.
If she wants snacks and it has carbs in it, or if we're at a party and everyone's just continuously grazing on things, we got to monitor that or gauge. So it can generally about 6 to 8 times a day, and that's just for the injections. Because then she's also doing the glucose finger pokes to check her numbers. Because it also gauging her dosage for insulin is also managing the numbers of her glucose, because if it's a little higher, then we might have to give a little bit more insulin plus whatever the calculation for her food is, or if it's a little lower, minusing it and letting her eat first and then giving her, it's just there's a science to being her pancreas.
Through it all, she has owned her disease.
She has her bad days. The difference with her is she's not allowed to let her bad days overcome her, because it could mean her life. And that's the hard part, is working with the emotional trauma of it out, more so than the physical. The finger pokes with the calloused fingers, the bruising from her injections, they don't seem to bother her as much as the pain of not being able to go back to being who she remembers herself being. But this is her now, and she gets proud of it sometimes, too.
Since airing their story, the Youngs have been humbled by such an amazing response from the community and from those abroad.
Within sharing our story, there have been a lot of people who want to respond to it and be a part of getting it out there, so that way other families don't have to go through such an overwhelming process and scary.
Part of getting it out there is forming a non-profit organization that aims to educate not just the school system, but child care providers and even medical professionals, because there are simple signs that sometimes are overlooked.
A big part of starting an organization for type 1 diabetes, because this is what we found here on Guam, is there's a lot of support for type 2, and the type 2 community, the Diabetes Association on Guam has been really great with our daughter. But I find myself still sharing with them the information about type 1, and I'm happy to do that for them.
They say the smallest part of creating awareness is just getting people to know the signs and symptoms, from those on the front lines like teachers noticing a child frequently needing the restroom to excessive thirst.
The biggest thing is awareness. It's just being aware. And if sharing our story is what gets people aware, no matter how vulnerable it makes us look, it's important. It's important.
To find out more about type 1 diabetes, you can head over to test1drop.org or jdrf.org. With this week's Health Check Report, I'm Jonah Goncharfris.
Health Check is presented by
Island Cancer Center.